Hey there, welcome to the garden. My name is Anna. This is my small little urban suburban garden, and I wanted to chat today about the fall garden because I know when I started growing fall gardens I ended up with a few issues kind of specific to small garden spaces, but this could also be something to think about if you have a very heavily planted large garden. You know, maybe you filled your entire garden up, whether it's big or small, with all your summer crops and it's really full and there's not a lot of empty space. And so what do you do about planting a fall garden? Because that actually kind of starts toward the end of August, and usually there's a lot of things that are still growing. So I'm going to chat through some of the things that I think about with that today. My last frost is April. I start getting planting right around that time. I usually plant a lot of my summer annuals and peppers and things like that, and they go all the way through, a lot of them all the way through until my first frost, which is usually the end of October. So my last frost, or my first frost, is the end of October, but I do usually start planting out all of my fall crops probably end of August, early September. I actually did a video a while back like when I plant everything, so I'll try to remember to link that. But basically I'm planting things out and some stuff is still growing. Like my peppers will grow basically all the way through till a frost for me, my tomatoes and everything like that. So with a small garden space, I don't just have endless like empty holes and empty spaces to fill with the fall crops, but I still want to have a fall garden because I am in zone 7A, and so we can grow pretty much all the way through the winter. If you hear the water, that is the little container pond here that I'm sitting next to. So the first thing that can help with planting your fall garden and planning your fall garden is to start seeds inside or to buy seed started plants. Now that is sometimes completely necessary. For me, I can't like start a broccoli plant or collard greens. I couldn't even really sprout it out in the garden because it's so hot for us during the summer. But it also helps in terms of space because all the time that plant is getting started inside is still time that the space that I have can be being utilized by the tomato plants, by the pepper plants. They can just keep growing and keep producing, and I can just wait for that 6 weeks or 8 weeks while the plant is getting started. So that's a really kind of important step because it's kind of, you have to do it in a lot of cases, but it also does help with your space requirements. So just think about the space that you have, the plants that you want, get them started indoors, grow them on indoors sort of as long as you can. And depending on the size of your seed cell that you're starting into, that will give you a range of how much time you can keep them growing on indoors under grow lights until you're ready to plant them out for your fall garden. I tend to do a mix. Sometimes I'll do like a bigger cell, a little like 8 ounce cup that I'll start like my peppers, my broccoli, my collard greens. I do start my peppers in them in the spring, but I'll start all those bigger plants in there, and then I can let them kind of grow on indoors for as long as possible, and then I plant them out once they really need it. The other thing that you can do with starting plants is to underplant. So you can actually seed directly under plants while they're still growing. I have done that I seeded a bunch of kale last year underneath my pepper plant. So I just left my pepper plant in place, just let it keep growing, and then underneath it I seeded the kale and let that get started. I think it was like at the end of summer when it was starting to get a little cooler. It worked well because the pepper plants kind of shaded out a little bit of the heat and the sun, and so the kale I think was able to get started. And then once I pulled the pepper plants out probably end of October, then the kale really took off. But I was able to get the kale started and have the pepper plants and kind of have both, and then the kale just kept growing all winter, and it ended up working out really well. So you can do some planting in and around your summer annuals, and then what you do at the end of the season when you're ready to take your peppers or whatever your big summer plant is out, you just cut it off at the base, right at the soil, leave the roots in, let the kale keep growing or the spinach or whatever you're growing. And then, in the spring, I usually do end up pulling out whatever kind of root system is left, but that way you don't have to, you know, mess with disturbing whatever you've planted underneath them. You just cut off at the base and take out the leaves and the branches and everything, let the roots kind of, I think they kind of decompose and help feed the garden too, so it works out well. Another thing you can do is just plan on no succession of some of your summer crops. So right now I have a lot of squash plants back here that they're starting to produce. They're going to start really forming squash here in the next few weeks. Technically, because my season goes till the end of October, I probably could get away with planting a whole nother succession of those plants. I could just pop in some more seeds and start another round of squash and have more summer squash. But because I know I want to have the fall garden and I know I'm going to need space for those fall plants, I will just actually plan not to do another succession of those plants, and I'll just know, you know what, no, I'm going to leave that space, because even though it feels like, oh, it's, you know, end of July, it's early August, I could definitely get in more squash. If you want more squash, that's great, but if you want to do the fall garden, you know, by the end of August, you're going to start thinking about planting out some of your fall crops, probably if you're in a zone similar to mine, and so maybe it's better to just either leave that space kind of empty just for a couple weeks, or put in something, I don't know, like a really quick crop of maybe like some baby greens, but those probably wouldn't even sprout. So just like leaving that space empty and just knowing I'm not going to do successions of some of those summer crops. You know, if you've got like beans or something that are finishing up, just leave that space and know, okay, you know what, in a couple weeks we're going to plant out the fall garden. So I tend to like to have my beds completely full all the time, completely utilized, but I'm learning more and more that sometimes you just need to leave like those little bits of room so that, yeah, so that you can basically have room and have some space. And it just takes a little bit of planning ahead in your garden. The next thing you can do is you can take out plants early. So, you know, even though your pepper plants might go all the way till your frost, if you want to get your fall garden started and that's a priority, you know, you're going to have a lot of those plants growing all the way through the winter, maybe you just take a plant out a little early so that you can put in your fall crop. And that's just a sacrifice that sometimes it makes sense to make. It can be hard when you're like, oh my gosh, I could get a few more tomatoes, but sometimes when you look at it, you realize, okay, like I could get a handful more of cherry tomatoes, or I could just take this plant out, plant in my fall crops, and have a whole big fall winter garden that you know, I'm going to be utilizing for even longer. So sometimes making those kind of calls, it's hard, but if you've got like a small garden space, you know, you're going to have to sacrifice a couple tomatoes in order to have your fall garden. And I think I usually end up doing that every year, where it's like, all right, you know, there's a few more tomatoes on the vine, I'm just going to harvest it now, maybe even bring the green tomatoes inside and ripen them on the counter, and then just plant out the fall garden so that we have the fall garden in, because there does become a point where the plants need to get in, they need to get established, they need to start growing well, the temperatures are warm enough before it starts really getting into cold, because once you start hitting those frosts, the plants kind of stop growing as quickly. The light, you know, days are getting shorter, things just aren't growing as fast. Then the other thing you can think about is doing just switching out some containers, doing some container growing. So I love having a container garden, because if you've got an extra container, you don't even need to switch it out. Your petunias may grow till frost, and then I just might add another container next to it with some salad greens or some lettuce. That is a really great way to have more room in your garden and more areas to switch out. So it's one of the things that I really love about growing in containers and having a container garden, is it adds a lot of flexibility. You can just, as long as you've got room, pop in another container and start growing some of your fall crops. And there are a lot of fall plants that grow super well in containers. So you can grow all kinds of lettuces and greens and collard greens and spinach and kale. All of those things can grow in containers. So maybe just leave your whole summer garden as it is, let it go all the way till frost or as long as possible, but then add some containers and put in a few fall crops in containers, and that'll work beautifully as well. So there are a lot of options for having a fall garden, and even if you have a small garden that you've packed full with summer crops, or a big garden packed full. You can still have a fall garden, you can still make it work, and it's just like a little planning and just thinking through what you want to sacrifice, where you want to put things, what containers you want to add. It's, you know, it's definitely doable, and I encourage you to try to figure it out because it's so fun to have some of those fall crops, and to have, I love the winter garden. It's a different look, it's a little bit more minimalist, it's a little more pared down, but it's really beautiful, and it just gives you something to keep coming out and doing. I am out here year round, and I'm so lucky to live in a zone where I'm able to do that, where that's even possible. I know for some people it's just not possible, but maybe you could have a few fall crops, or maybe you could add in a few things. So anyways, those are just a few ideas for putting together your fall garden. I think for me this year, probably the route I'm mostly gonna take is just probably at a certain point pulling everything out. I really want to do a lot of kind of decorative planting as well. I've talked about all my violas that I want to plant. I did a whole video of all my viola seeds. I've got like a lot of plans for containers full of violas. So I'm going to start a lot of stuff inside. I'm going to try to have like all my starts going. And then as soon as I feel like I have space to kind of sacrifice, I'll probably just end up pulling out a lot of these things at a certain point and just replanting in. I definitely am not going to do another succession of my squash. I'm just going to let my squash go forward, do their thing. Once those are done, take that out and have room for fall things. And I may replant. So right in this area, I've got a bunch of peppers and eggplants. Last year I underplanted, that's where I underplanted kale under those peppers, and it did really, really well. So depending on how I'm feeling, I may try to do some more underplanting with the kale. It seemed particularly that kale did well with that. I haven't really experimented. I've tried with some arugula and it kind of just was too hot still. It kind of bolted. But lettuce, there's a sweet spot for me kind of at early September. There's a sweet spot where I can plant lettuce and it's cool enough that it will get growing and I'll actually get a good harvest, but it's not too hot yet that it bolts. So I'm gonna play around with some of that with the lettuce, and the kale seems to be a little bit hardier and do a little bit better, I should say, with being planted in the heat. So I'm still playing around with exactly how it works for my garden, but those are sort of my plans. But right now I'm trying to just kind of soak in the summer garden. It's hard to think about fall, even though I do love fall. But if you do want to do a fall garden, I will say that now is really the time to start making your plans and ordering any seeds you need and all of that. So this is the summer garden. Enjoy it while we've got it, and then we will be changing it up in just probably about 6 weeks. I can't believe we're already at that point. Anyways, thank you so much for spending a little time out here with me. I hope you have a wonderful day in your garden, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye.